Hello again, YouTube. Tad Atkinson, the Grognard DM here again. And this time I think I'm going to discuss primarily the difference in combat between the more modern editions of D&D and especially first edition, a little bit of second edition D&D, AD&D. We'll start with the modern because most people watching this are probably familiar with it. Very straightforward, actually, from an organizational perspective, makes a lot of sense. Everything is difficulty class numbered, so armor class becomes another difficulty number you've got to exceed on your D20 roll. Everybody has an individual initiative based on their dexterity score bonus and a D20 roll. Once initiative is rolled, that's it, and everybody just takes their turn as they go around the combat round. Very simple, very straightforward. Only problem is, and the only time I've had this problem, it's entirely on me as a DM. I should have just simply skipped that person, but I had a table of 14 players, counting the NPCs. Frequently was 18 initiatives, but 14 players, and one player was running a wizard, and God love him, he didn't know all of his spells, what they did, all the details of them. So we would always get around to him and everything would stop while he's fumbling through books. This was Pathfinder, but some people call that D&D 3.75. It just would bog down. I should have simply said, you don't know what spell you're casting yet, so you lose this round. On we go. But I was nice. I gave him the opportunity to play his character, so that was charged to me. That was not the system itself. Now, first edition, a little bit more arcane. First of all, there is an intentions phase before initiative is rolled. Bear that in mind. So everybody's sitting there planning their round and saying, okay, this is what I'm going to do this round, this is what I'm going to do this round. In a way, you have the problematic player like that can't make up his mind. You've got peer pressure aiding him in reaching a decision so that he doesn't lose the round and they don't lose his spell power. Like, come on, buddy, make up your mind. So it's after intentions are declared that initiative actually gets rolled. And initiative is rolled every round. So literally it can go either way. In a way that's kind of more realistic, especially for mass combat. You read in historical novels all the time of one side losing the initiative. Well, that combat's already been joined, so how do they lose initiative? Well, somebody hesitated at the wrong moment, and so suddenly the other side was able to seize advantage. That's what that kind of reflects. The other thing, too, is the difference in time scale. A melee round in modern editions is 6 seconds, whereas in AD&D it's an entire minute, which is why there are fewer attacks in one round than you see in later editions. And because of that, spell casting is defined in segments, as is movement. And so as a result, each segment is, of course, 6 seconds. That's where the 10th of a round concept came out of, I think. But otherwise, you're making your attack roll, and I'm consulting a chart and seeing if the number is higher than it needs to be, in which case you hit the AC. Where it kind of goes off the rails in first edition as far as what would be intuitive common sense is, first of all, the armor class system. In modern editions, everybody's used to a base of 10, add in any appropriate dex modifiers or penalties, and then your armor gives you a bonus to armor class, and you just build up basically from 10. So the higher the number, the harder you are to hit. In first edition, I don't know if they were doing some kind of a number line theory or something, but 10 is the absolute worst AC. It really doesn't get worse than that. You don't see any AC 11s or 12s or anything like that. And you go lower number is better. So you have a negative AC, you are really hard to hit. Like I say, that's kind of counterintuitive, and some people, especially people that come to AD&D from a modern experience, have a rough time grappling with that. There's also a concept called THAC0. It really doesn't come into player knowledge, player awareness, until second edition. because then everybody's recording their THACOs and so on and so forth. DM didn't really have to deal with it very much either, because you're just consulting a chart in first edition. It's already factored in for you. But the idea behind THACO stands for to hit armor class 0. That's the number you need to hit somebody with an AC of 0. Remembering, lower number, harder to hit. So, if somebody's got a THACO of 17, say, then you're just simply subtracting 10 to hit an AC of 10. If they're trying to hit an AC of negative 10, you're adding 10. Now, to make things a little fair, 20s were not automatic hits in AD&D. 20 would repeat 6 times on the combat chart, so that even a lower level character has a chance to hit a fairly high, i.e. low negative number, with all their modifiers added in. Because if you rolled a natural 20, you could, okay, well, what are your modifiers? What's the modified roll? Because a 23 or 24 may not hit that armor class. So it's not an auto hit. Criticals weren't really a thing. A lot of DMs, I use them a lot, and a lot of DMs had their own critical hit systems, where it was either just simply double damage. Dragon Magazine put out a critical hits and misses chart, so you could also fumble. Some of the fumbles were pretty entertaining. But otherwise, within the system itself, a 1 is always a failure, but a 20 is not an automatic success in combat. Which is why even gods have saving throw values of 2s, because a 1 is still a failure. So that's the kind of the overview of the flow of combat. Now, as far as the mechanics and details of combat, we tracked weapon length and weapon speed in AD&D. Now, why weapon length? If you're charging into melee, even if you're the side that lost initiative and the other side isn't trying to do any ranged attacks, they're just waiting for you to close to melee because they're setting for your charge, whoever has the longer weapon length strikes first. Makes sense. So if you're wielding a short sword and you're charging into somebody who's braced for your charge with a spear, the person that has the spear is going to attack first and possibly score double damage and negate your charge. That makes a certain amount of sense, if you think about it, even if the spear wielder lost the initiative to you. But otherwise, weapon speeds were important to break ties, for instance. If you're wielding a longsword, it's a speed factor of 5, and I'm wielding a dagger that has a speed factor of 3, I'm going to have a chance to, once I'm already engaged with you, sneak into a hit, duck in under your reach. The only time that that would change is, again, at the initial closing to melee, because the longsword's got a longer reach than a dagger. So the longsword wielder gets to strike first. And this is also important with spellcasting. There were no concentration checks or saving throws or anything like that. If a spellcaster got hit and damage was dealt, he lost the spell. Well, how do you determine whether or not in this situation a spellcaster gets hit? Compare the casting time to the attacker's weapon speed. If the casting time is shorter, the spell goes off. If the casting time is greater than the weapon speed of the guy attacking him, he gets a chance to attack. If he hits and he deals damage, that spell is lost. Also important with tied initiatives, again. So, if you're on the constantly winning initiative, then you're pretty much going to be able to throw off 9-segment spells without worrying about getting it spoiled, because your side won initiative. But if both sides are tied, maybe not. Maybe you want to think about something shorter like a magic missile. The other big difference is the way surprise is handled. Surprise in modern editions, you get basically half action for your combat round. A movement or an attack or something like that. You don't get to do your full activity, as it were. In first edition, surprise can win the battle, literally. Everybody rolls, they'll just go standard. We're not going to think about the special exceptions like rangers or special races that have different surprise abilities. Just standard. Both sides roll a d6. If it's a 1 or a 2, there is surprise for that side. And if the other side is not surprised, then the difference between the two die rolls is the number of segments that the surprising side has to attack the surprised side. And except for movement and spellcasting, each segment counts as a full round of activity. So you literally, say you've got 3 segments of surprise. You can easily move to engage somebody if you've got even a medium range encounter distance. And then take your full round of melee attacks. If you're a high-level fighter, you have multiple attacks per round. And possibly drop the person before they even do anything. If you're a spellcaster, it's number of segments. So if it's a 3-segment surprise, again, using this example, a 3rd level spell or less, rule of thumb with a magic user, you're going to be able to cast that. If you're casting a 4th level spell, probably it's going to be a 4-second casting time, which means you spend 3 of those 4 segments during surprise casting, and then everybody's rolling initiative. Well, your intention is obvious, you're completing that spell. If your side loses initiative and they attack you because you still haven't gotten that last segment off, if you're damaged, you lose the spell. So it's risky casting spells that have a longer casting time than the number of segments. The other thing that was really crazy in 1st edition, if you were a bow monkey, you got twice your number of attacks per round. So anybody would get 4 attacks per round with a long or short bow, or the composite variants. If you were some kind of a specialist and you got multiple attacks with a bow per round, say 3 per round, then you got 6. You literally became Legolas in Surprise. In the movies, Legolas, at any rate. The mitigating factor in Surprise, this is kind of where the game balance comes in, is if you had a high dex and you were on the Surprise side, each plus of your reaction adjustment removed 1 segment of Surprise. So an 18 dex gives you a +3 reaction adjustment. In the example that we're using, where you've been surprised for 3 segments, that 18 dex person recovers almost immediately, and so he cannot be attacked as if he were surprised. He can't attack himself, but he is not surprised for the purposes of the surprise segments, and therefore is kind of, unless he's caught in a fireball, blast radius, or something like that, exempt from those attacks. At least that's kind of the way I always ran it. The greatest thing about all of this is, from my perspective, the intentions phase. Because it does make combat run a lot more smoothly when everyone else is aware of what they're, everybody's got the game plan down for that round. They don't have to plan the entire combat, just that round. What are we doing? And I'm declaring what the bad guys are doing. So at that point, it's just a matter of die rolling. Initiative in 1st edition also, by the way, is a d6, again, unmodified by anything. Some DMs played with that. They added the reaction adjustment into the d6 rolls to see which got the higher die, and so on and so forth, which puts monsters at an inherent disadvantage because monsters in 1st edition didn't have full stats, so you don't necessarily know what the dex of an orc is, or the dex of a dragon or a demon. So it's you give the player characters a little bit of advantage, and I have no problems with that personally. I think player characters, especially in 1st edition, where there's a lot of save or die type of situations, no mitigating factors. If you fail to save versus poison, and it's a save or die poison, you're dead. So sorry, create a new character type of thing. Or have a whole bunch of gold in the bank so you can pay to raise him from the dead. Because paid for raised dead in 1st edition is based on the level of the person being raised. That's another talk for another time. The other thing, I mentioned multiple attacks. Initiative kind of gets discarded once you start having multiple attack routines. Say a bunch of player characters are going against a troll. Player characters have 1 attack per round. The troll gets 3. The troll automatically attacks first, regardless of what the initiative roll is. Then the initiative roll determines who attacks first for that second attack, the troll or the party. And then the troll attacks last. If you have a character in that is attacking the troll, and that person attacks twice per round, The troll initiative doesn't matter at all. A troll attacks first, then the player character gets his first attack, then the troll gets his second attack, player character gets his second attack, troll gets his third attack. Boom, 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 boom. Initiative only matters in melee combat when the combatants really have the same number of attacks or where there's an attack that's going to correspond together. So that's kind of the basic rundown of rules as written for first edition AD&D. It is very complex, primarily because for whatever reason, the designers at TSR decided to break the combat rules between the Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide. So you've got to read both books to have a full grasp of how combat's supposed to work. And then they had some refinements they threw into Unearthed Arcana. So now suddenly you've got 3 books that you've got to read to know how combat rules as written runs. So in terms of simplicity, Modern Edition has it well over AD&D. They really simplified it very nicely and very effectively. I like, from a team-making perspective, I like having the intentions phase. And there's no reason why that can't be a part of it. My next video, I'm going to start talking about some of the combat systems I see in other games, and some of them kind of incorporate that into a more modern style combat system. So until next time, may all your hits be crits.